Hey, good people, welcome to chapter 5, as we're going to be talking about sexual identity, behavior, and relationships. Excuse me. Now, in this chapter, the book kind of lays out and gives us terminology just to, again, set the foundation for information that we're going to be reviewing. I'm sorry, I had a little brain cramp there. Information and content we're going to be reviewing throughout the chapter. But the place where I want to begin is just in talking about sexual orientation. So we have terminology and gives us explanations of heterosexuality, homosexuality, bisexual, and kind of what this all means from a biological perspective. But I think when we begin to talk about sexual orientation, we have to, I think, allow for a discussion of not just the biology of sex, but the culture of sexuality. I think it's safe to say that we know that a lot of research is taking place and is taking place for researchers to try to define how we get to a place of recognizing sexual orientation. And as I stated before, I think it's safe to say that it's a perfect storm of both, of biology and culture, in that we have to have a respect for both in order to try to understand the whole premise behind sexual orientation. One of the things that I think in our society we're still kind of shaky about is the whole idea of, and our attitudes towards the LGBTQ community. What is that like? And the whole homophobia, and those perspectives. What is that about, and how does that affect the way the family functions, and how individuals within the family unit may view themselves in society? When we're talking about, our attitudes in general about, about homophobia, we got to ask ourselves, like, what really is our concern from an individual perspective? What is truly our concern? I think it's safe to say that in years gone by, or in years past, when we spoke about homophobia or anti-gay prejudices, it was always kind of in tune with, or alluded to, or connected to medical diagnosis of HIV or AIDS. And I think, though, at this point, we really have to ask ourselves, what is our hang up? What are we thinking about when we get to this place of acknowledging culturally what legally has already been impressed upon us? First of all, the opportunity of legal marriage for same-sex couples. But what are we struggling with culturally? This slide that I have up here is just a slide to show you all kind of how our perspectives has changed throughout the years. And I'm just going to move my picture around here so you can see this slide a little bit clearly, that the attitudes have changed from 1996. And unfortunately, this slide only goes up to 2016. But we see where it has started to decline, that marriage should not be legal. It went from 47% down to 28%. Where marriage should be legal, it went from 44% up to 68%. So we see that there is definitely a change in the attitude on an individual basis, but what about culturally? I think it's safe to say we still have a little bit of work to do, right? But we're going to move on from that and start talking about sexual scripts. What are sexual scripts? Sexual scripts are going to be the norms, the behaviors, the expected behaviors regarding sex, and regarding, regarding sexual behavior. And when we talk about sexual scripts, we have to, in our society, good people, we have to have an understanding that there is truly a double standard within our society of sexual scripts, and also a misunderstanding that comes along with the double standard. Because when we talk about sexual scripts between males and females, some of the things that our book talks about from the male perspective is that the male script emphasizes sex over intimacy, versus the female script that emphasizes intimacy over sex. the feelings over sex. So when we're talking about the male perspective of emphasizing sex over intimacy, some of the things that they look at is the idea that the man is always in charge, that all physical contact leads to sex, that the man wants sex and is always ready for it, versus the women kind of look at sexuality or sexual activity as women should not know too much about sex or be too experienced about it. When, on the other hand, we think that men ought to be all the way experienced about it, that women shouldn't talk about sex, that a man should know how to please a woman. When we talk about these sexual scripts, we really have to ask ourselves, where did these standards, where did these norms generate from? How did we get to this place? And I think it's safe to say, we know that when we talk about sexual scripts, that when we look at kind of the stories or the history of how society and how socialization progressed through society, we know that like in the early pioneer days, that there was this whole idea of women being in this mindset of purity. And when we get through the sexual revolution with Alfred Kinsey, we know that he began to expose the opportunity, or maybe I should say present information to expose folks to have an opportunity to really think about what they're thinking about when it comes down to sexual behavior. Now, when we're talking about sexual behavior, as it pertains to the family unit, we have to know that sexual behavior, it does impact the way the family functions. When we begin talking about sexuality within the family unit, we have to look at it from childhood. When are children initially exposed to the concept of sexuality? And we got to think about what the elements may mean. So children may see mommy, daddy give each other a kiss. They may see grandma, grandpa hug. But when do we begin in childhood to associate a specific touch or a look with sexuality? Then as we get into our adolescent stages, this is where things start to get a little challenging, because this is where we begin to see the whole topic of premarital sex and teen pregnancy. When we think about teen pregnancy, and let me go back a little bit, good people, when we think about non-marital or premarital sex, that whole idea that it's okay to hook up because it doesn't mean anything. But really, but where's the emotion? Where's the feeling behind the act of sexuality, of that, I should say, of that sexual behavior? And when we have that sexual behavior, that premarital sex or the non-marital sex played out within adolescence, we get these issues that the book kind of highlights with several different graphics. One of them being the issue of birth control and how many adolescents use it, the availability of it, but most importantly, their understanding of the use of birth control. Then we have to look at the whole topic of teen pregnancy and how do we see that playing out, and how does that impact the family unit? Again, when we're mindful that the family unit is a system within society, from that structural functional perspective, how is this system impacting other systems in order for us to interact in society? When we take the system and then we begin to look at the various elements that can comprise the system, or the variables that can make up the system, we look at, and this graphic kind of explores things based on race and ethnicity with a specific age group of 15 to 19. So, and going back, when we're thinking about sexual expression through our lives, we have to think about, again, from chapter 1, that developmental theory, how we develop and what makes sense to us from a micro level perspective, but also how does our decisions and our behavior from a micro level impact when we're talking about interacting from a macro perspective. Let me go back real quick, good people. I'm sorry. Going up. When we talk about sex throughout, or sexual expression throughout our lives, the very last bullet that's here, sex and the elderly. This is something that is really interesting, this graph that they provide for us in our text, excuse me, that focuses on, or that it looks at sexual intercourse from age 45 and over. And I want you to take a look at what we look at, the differences between males and females. Okay, one of the things that this research shows us is that married men and married women over the age of 45 still engage in intercourse. However, one of the things we have to pay attention to is that there are times when for older men that sex is more important than it is for women. Well, why is that? What happens that it's more important for men than it is for women? And this is something that the textbook explores. I'm sorry. One of the things that we look at when we're talking about sexual relationships throughout our life stages is not only the quantity of sexual relationships or sexual encounters, but the quality of it. That's what's important. So when we go back and we look at the issue of sex in marriage, this is where, again, quantity versus quality. And when we're talking about quality, not just to say, and I'm hoping that I don't offend anybody with this, but not just for someone to say, oh, that was a good lay. But when we're talking about quality, we're looking at the intimacy part of that sexual relationship. And when I'm talking about the intimacy, I'm talking about that connection. And that's where sometimes when the book begins to explore that idea of extramarital sex, what happens when there is a party in a marriage and they step outside of that marriage for sexual gratification? What is missing in the marital bed or in the marital relationship that there's a need to step outside? Is it that there's something missing in a marital bed? Is there something that's missing in the emotional bank? Is there something that's missing in the maturity bank? All these different issues that we explore in chapter 5 when we're talking about sexual behavior and relationships. So this is just a brief overview, good people, of chapter 5. Be mindful that you have a chapter quiz, discussion post, assignments on Revel and in Brightspace. All right, so take your opportunity, read through chapter 5, read through the articles that are in chapter 5, just to gain a little more insight and to give you something else to make you think about some things. All right, good people, I bid you love, peace, and bacon grease.